welcome to the first episode of the All Rev'd Up podcast. I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
And we are so excited to welcome all of you who are listening to this conversation where we're talking about race and faith. What else are we talking about, Irene?
Oh, politics, culture, music, anything and everything that is in the news and in our lives. And we come from two different Black faith traditions.
Very different.
Two different coasts.
Very different.
And watch out, Emmett.
Come on.
Two different generations.
Very different.
Okay, you see.
But we were both math majors in college.
That's ridiculous.
That has to count for something.
Absolutely here. And we really hope, to evoke your curiosity with wonderment and excitement that will even raise your eyebrows.
And I think the difference helps to stimulate some thoughts. I think one of the things that we don't do enough in this season of life, in this era, we don't think enough. So hopefully we can help to not only inspire each other to think, but help our listeners.
Well, I hope we do. We definitely hope to sort of enrich people's lives intellectually and spiritually. But one of the things that we hope to do, considering that we are on opposite side of the table and politics here, is that to really engage in a kind of civil discourse.
Yes.
That we can agree to disagree. And how do we really, as ministers, how do we minister in a time such as this?
Yes.
And maybe what we hope to do is that with this kind of conversation, we will example that for others.
Amen.
This is our first podcast, and for a good while, I've been racking my brain about what would be the best thing to talk about. What should just sort of come out of our canon? But let me tell you what I've been watching and obsessing about, and it's very personal. So I have really been obsessing about it, and I've been crying a lot about it. It's Ava DuVernay's miniseries, When They See Us. I know you've been watching it too.
I have been obsessing over it.
Yeah.
But it's been difficult to watch because it's just so emotionally wrenching, and it's really traumatically triggering.
One of the things is that I was back home when the Central Park incident happened. We call it now the Central Park 5. This is a reenactment, a retelling of the Central Park 5 rape. And it was written and co-produced and directed by our wonderful new screenwriter, Ava DuVernay. But any event here, it really explores the lives of the kids and their families during the event and after the event. So let me tell you a little bit about the event here. So 5 young males, 4 African-American, 1 Hispanic, between the ages of 14 and 16, were accused of raping a white jogger in Central Park, the North Mayor of Central Park. The 5 kids, unfortunately, were convicted of various crimes, one of which was assault, robbery, riot, rape, sexual assault, and attempt of murder. They got a maximum sentence, all 5 of them. The interesting thing is the actual assailant finally confessed, because what corroborated his confession was DNA evidence. So their sentence was vacated. But listen, after decades, in prison, these little boys, these young boys who are now young men, their life for the most part has been wrecked.
Well, this was 1989, and the 5 young men are Kevin Richardson, Antron McCray, Yusef Salam, Corey Wise, and Raymond Santana. And as you mentioned, they were prosecuted in 1990, and in 2002 was the confession that actually led to the vacation of the convictions and the removal of them from the sex offender registry. And then there were settlements in 2014 and 2016
that were hard won.
Yeah,
that's one thing that we just have to really remember about this incident here. There's some stories that even, and particularly with this case, because it became so iconic, became so nationally known. As we know, our now president Donald Trump took out ads, full-page ads, in all the major New York dailies here. They were exonerated, but then even when it took a hard time for them to get the settlement, Donald Trump felt that when he took out the ad, he basically what he wanted was to reinstate
The death penalty.
the death
Yeah.
penalty. But you know what? He's not the only sort of player in this here. We had Mayor, Michael Bloomberg. He refused to settle with the boys for decades with the whole idea that the city lawyers could win this case. And it wasn't really until Mayor Bill de Blasio was elected mayor and he settled with the 5 plaintiffs for $41 million. So, I mean, even in the face of these boys being exonerated, we get to see we get to see what basically Michelle Alexander said in the new Jim Crow is that the most pressing racial incident today is really racial justice in our court system.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned what we get to see, because the question is, what do we see? I mean, Ava DuVernay and all of her brilliance and some of the other pictures that she's done, Selma and 13, she's really stimulating this notion of these young 5 men, their families, the communities that they come from, and do we see them as human beings? Do we see them as the Central Park 5 or as the exonerated 5?
Right.
So what does it mean to when they see us?
Yeah, and I appreciated her lens to really see how a whole community is impacted by this. So, disclaimer here. So, I knew one of the boys because his grandmother went to the church that I was pastoring in the Bronx here. Yeah, and I'm also a Wellesley graduate, so I knew, the jogger.
Yeah.
Absolutely here. So here was a number of moving parts here because, again, they painted these boys as criminals. The Wellesley graduate here, they went on to talk about not only was she a Wellesley graduate, but that she went on, to Yale Business School and then worked for Solomon Brothers. We even had the chairperson of the Wellesley Economic Department just talk about that she was probably the most brilliant and top students that she had seen like in 5 decades. And the very interesting thing is you get to see the inequity not only in our racial justice system, but you begin to see who lives really matter. Because one of the things I certainly said, well, I'm a Wellesley graduate. Back then, I too jogged around Central Park. She's also, because she graduated in '82. I'm back home, and so it was a hard experience because when the boys were, exonerated, the grandmother of one of them had already passed away. It gets my heart because, and the whole church. We prayed all the time, hoping for his release. Yeah. She told us that he wasn't that kind of young man. Plus, we've seen, it's the interesting thing is that we saw this young man grow up.
I remember growing up in Los Angeles and so many young, and I'm about the same age as these young men too. So we were all just horrified, not only at the Central Park 5 situation, but so many situations in Los Angeles. You remember that the Los Angeles Police Department was probably one of the most brutal departments in the nation. And so we remember as young people just having such fear and anxiety and paranoia about this happening to us. With all of the incidents that are going on in 2019, and we have a hashtag for everything, right? Hashtag driving while black, hashtag picnicking while black, hashtag this and that. What is it about American society or folks in this country when they see black people? What do they see?
I think there are a couple of things here that they see. I think that they codified blackness as criminality. I think that's it. I think what they see here, that they see as in the context of trespassing in their space. When I think about what exactly is Ava DuVernay trying to do, and I felt like W.E. Du Bois has talked about it in Souls of Black Folks. Every black, well-known writer that we know, from James Baldwin to Toni Morrison, I think is kind of decentering the kind of what we call white gaze. I think that's important because what comes with the white gaze, in my understanding, is intrinsically what comes with it is policing. And the policing, and it originates really from the slave code, as you well know. That whole notion that we weren't allowed to assemble, because the whole idea that if 2 or more of us assemble, it would cause a slave revolt. So what I see here when we talk about that, and I think what is very prevalent this year, you just mentioned it, white people calling the cops on blacks. To me, that is what I call the white gaze, because they self-deputize.
Well, I
You
mean,
know,
yeah.
they're the ones. Then no, see, it's no longer they
So we have a
self-deputize.
situation where white individuals are determining the future, determining the prospects, determining the survival, determining the opportunities for non-whites. And so when we get to Phoenix, Arizona, where you have the situation where Drayvon Ames and his pregnant fiancee, Aisha Harper, with their two young children, one was 4 years old and one was 1 year old. The
Oh
4-year-old
God.
apparently removed a doll from the Family Dollar store.
I like the fact that you. I love the fact that you say you won't say steal, because
No.
all the news network kept saying this 4-year-old stole a doll,
Yeah.
and you go like, okay, you try to put this together. She's 4 years old.
Yeah.
Does she even know what she's doing? and right there, you begin to see the early sort of what I depict as the criminalization.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's as early as 4 years old. It's saying to
It's the
me.
preschool to prison pipeline, right?
That's right, and it says that we're not innocent. That there's no such thing as a young black child.
Well, somebody called the
being-
police, and the police come out full weapons, fully engaged, cursing and treating the family as if they're terrorists. I mean, even to the point that the mayor, Kate Gallego, apologized. The police chief, Jerry Williams, apologized. But the Arizona Republic, the local newspaper there, said that the Phoenix Police Department recorded the most police shootings nationwide last
Yeah.
year. And so in many ways, we're left to believe
that
that
hasn't gotten in the
we're
news.
grateful that these folks are still alive.
Yeah, but let me tell you what it made me think of. It made me think of two things. One, there was that moment when I was watching the video, and I, at this point, I need to say this. I feel like I'm aging in the era that I was born into, because of the erosion of all these sort of civil rights gains. But let me tell you what I really thought of, and even though we are 2 generations apart, Emmett, I wasn't born during this time. Okay, although I'm referencing it, but it reminded me of all the various stories that we hear of black women having their children grabbed from their arms on the auction block.
Yeah.
And they're crying. And there was this moment that this woman walked up to the woman. She says, I'll take your baby. And you're hoping at that moment, because you don't have much to do. And she's pregnant, mind this. And the cop is yelling, hands up, hands up. Now, the people got to understand this. If she did hands up, as the police officer screamed at her to do, she would have dropped the baby. Mm-hmm. He kept yelling. You didn't know whether he was going to shoot her or not. She's also hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of, this woman came up and took the baby. And you got to hope that your baby is safe. Could you imagine at that moment? But I felt like what Ava DuVernay was also saying when we raised that question, when do you see us? It sort of reminded me again about Central Park, because Central Park is a park that is supposed to be welcome to everyone, but it's not. And it's the whole idea of green space. It's a beautiful green space. It has a zoo. It has the Shakespeare Theater. It has a lot of just wonderful amenities for someone who wants to, like in the summer, like this would be the time you would go out and see Shakespeare in the park and concerts. But they don't bring events for people of color here. And so the boys were trespassing for a lot of reasons. They didn't stay up in that Harlem Mare, because that's where you'll get folks of color to enter in here. They sort of trespass their boundaries within this sort of open space here. Central Park is known for Tavern on the Green, another landmark.
Well,
where
if
the
it's
rich and famous,
open for everybody, how can they trespass? I mean, if it's a Central Park for New York City,
it's called that Central. That's what it's called, Central Park.
How are they trespassing? I mean, you have to help me see that, because a park is a park for everyone, as you suggested. So how are they perceived as trespassing in a space and a place where they don't belong?
But it raises the question of being black and what is perceived white spaces. I mean, one of the reasons why we think that police officers call the cops on us is because for 2 reasons. It's the whole. First of all, we're assumed to be suspicious. It assumes to be wherever I am.
But why? Why?
Because I think when you call the cops, they can rely that the cops will come. They can be hysterical all they want about it, and they don't have to worry about being shot.
So what threat do we pose to people
I
who need to call the cops to remove us from spaces that we purchase, that we afford, that
our
we are
citizen
welcome
rights give us
into?
access to our
Yeah, I
taxpayer.
mean, come
Yeah,
on. So
yeah.
what rights do
It's
people
but
have?
what I think what the message I get from that is that white discomfort is valued over a black person's civil rights. That's the message that I get. We got to understand. I think a couple of things here when we're talking about desegregation, that it is an act that has to be pervasive throughout the country. It's not the province of just the South. It's not the province of any one particular geographic location. It is very much pervasive in America. And I think with the policing that we have in society, we say that it's policing. It is policing. It's about guns, the type of guns that we have on city streets.
Well, I think one of the challenges that we have that black lives will never matter until they matter to white lives.
But see, I have a problem with that, because when you say it won't matter until white folks matter. To me,
I didn't say white folks matter. I said until our lives matter
matter
to white folks.
But see, my point is then it still, to me, falls into this notion of the white gaze. It feels to me again that we don't have agency. We gotta wait until they become woke. I don't think that's it. I think that if we wait for that, we wouldn't be where we are today. So it doesn't matter whether our lives matter to them. What does matter is the kind of systematic changes I feel that need to be done so that all lives will matter. That as we sort of experimenting with this notion of American democracy, we will indeed understand we don't wait for no one. How long? Come on, you come out of that tradition.
Not long. So, I mean, you make a really good case here, Irene. And I'm just thinking about when they see us. Do they still see us as the remnant of slaves? Do they still see us as condescended population of people who have never been granted our full liberty, our pursuit of justice, and our happiness? How do people see us? Are they still seeing us based on these preconceived notions of bias, these perceptions of irregularity, but also this notion that these folks, whoever these and they are, don't.
We should really parse out who are the they and who are the these here, and I do think that that's important. While we can certainly pinpoint to specific white people. Certainly in our neighborhoods, okay, if we live in interracial neighborhoods, and certainly specific people who call the cops, we are really talking about a system of white supremacy and policies, to me, that keep that in place. So the they are the policies and laws in this country. Because I think what bothers me is that, how do they see us? Well, other than criminals, many people see us interlopers.
Yeah.
That's why they will call the cops. We're not in the right designated place, because you won't see black and white water fountains or bathroom, but we do understand you're in the wrong zip code and the wrong square. So that's the thing, and I think it's very interesting. What gets me about it is that we like to talk about how bad the South is, but we need to realize up South, this North here was the promised land, and how we still struggle very differently because we don't have the signs, and we trespass in those areas not knowing, that was white space. Who knew? There was no sign. So I think they see us as interlopers. Look at you and me. We went to some of the premier schools in this country. They see us as robbing their space, and then they will denigrate it with this whole notion of affirmative action. So, the they are is that we have to change the policies in this country.
I think you're right. I think there are some really good people who are protectors and who are managers of really, really bad policies.
And complicit.
Complicit as well.
Yeah.
I think there are some really good-hearted, compassionate, kind, and wonderful people who become the keepers of the flame of white nationalism, white supremacy, and all these type of things. And I think that's unfortunate.
You know what? It reminds me of King this moment. King said it's pretty much, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but he said it's not just the vitriol of the bad white people, but it's also the appalling silence, and that's the complicity of the good white people.
And that's what I mean when I say that black lives don't matter matter until they matter to white lives, because
Wow.
white lives have to speak up. White lives have to see it injustice.
But I'm not going to wait for that.
Well, you don't have to wait
No,
for it.
and
I think the
no.
reality of biracialness and biracial families is the reality that folks cannot be silent, that their silence can cost somebody their life.
Well, no, but also that their silence is killing them. See, so this is what I think, that, you know, when you say that white people need to speak up, I'm not going to wait for that for a couple of reasons, because I think white people folks who identify as white have to understand how they too are duped by this what I would think ideology of white supremacy. Because one of the questions I always ask white people when I do anti-racism workshops, how are you white, and how white are you? And when I'm asking that question, I'm asking you, how are you white? Well, they'll say they have white privilege. But when I'm asking you how white are you, I'm asking you, when did the Italians become white? When did the Irish become white? When did the Jews become white? Because really what I'm saying is, depending on your white ethnicity has a lot to do with how much white privilege you have. And when you racialize terminology like ethnicity, you think of that as just people of color. And I just think that when you don't know your history, and that's what you buy into this notion of homogenized whiteness, that you become dangerous. And a good example of that, come on, Charlottesville 2017, we saw that. We saw, I could have never imagined it, because we all knew that the day after what happened the night before, let me say, that there was going to be this protest, this white supremacist rally where the
tiki torch.
Okay, that you see the tiki torch that you see at a lot of lesbian weddings. I know that because I officiate them. Okay, I'm so confused by the symbols there. But here they were saying, the Jews will not replace us. The Jews will not replace us. So that's what I'm saying, that if you buy into this notion of whiteness, you become not only complicit, but you become dangerous to yourself.
What do you do with the notion of black folks who buy into the same narrative?
Well, this is what I say here. Then what you have is black white supremacists, because that's an ideology. And two examples of that to me would be Clarence Thomas as well as Ben Carson, because they can affect policy and legislation in this country. I just think this here. It's one person, one zip code, one square at a time. I think that when we do an intersectional analysis or activism, we will get people like we saw King get at 1963 at the March on Washington, because what was it for? Jobs. Okay, and so he brought the country to gather down at this mall. So I think that, I don't know if I can, really eradicate racism or teach white people really to be less racist, but I can do this much. I can do an intersectional kind of activism. It reminds me of what really I would say that Hemingway once said. He said that the world breaks us all, but some of us grow strong in those broken places. I think an intersectional analysis helps us all to sort of work together.
In the Protestant church, we usually do a closing, a final blessing. Benediction is from the Latin word that means to speak well or to offer a good word. So allow me to offer these words. As we continue to engage this journey of life, let us strive to see one another, not merely with our eyes, but with our hearts. Let us see the best in one another, and not simply the worst. Let us see the potential in one another, and not merely misperceptions. Let us see a bright future for one another. Let us see each other for who we are becoming. When I see you, let the smile in my heart be a reflection of the smile on your face when you see me.
Amen and ashe.
Hey. All Rev'd Up is a production of WGBH.
Our producer is Tori Bedford. Our marketing and social producer is Cavante Smalls. This episode's recording engineer is Kevin O'Connell.
Music for this episode is from Lee Rosevere.
And additional thanks to Nina Perzuki, Kate Ida, John Ryan, Phil Rado, Chelsea Mers, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of All Rev'd Up.